Hello everybody, welcome to the CSS3 course. In this video, I'm going to talk about the ways to style a table. So before I discuss the styling techniques, I'm going to show you the web page on the right hand side, followed by the HTML code on the left hand side. So my website has two tables, and I'm going to show you the HTML code corresponding to these two tables. So for the first one, I simply have a caption, and after the caption I have a table head, okay, and inside the table head I just include some column headers, and I'm able to use this pattern to represent this particular cell element content. Ampersand NBSP semicolon means I'm going to include a non-breaking space character. So here it is a space, and I can simply continue my headers by including the scope equals col attribute value pair inside the th tag, which is the opening tag, okay. And I can continue to see that the table body is shown below, and on this body, I just include some row headers, and after the row headers, I just include some elements. Okay, so TD means the table data. And after the first row, I do the second row to include other pieces of information which would grow along the row. Okay, so I have some row headers, which are the names of some students. And after the row header, I just include some grades for these students in each of the subjects mentioned in the column headers. So this is the major idea of the first table. Here I also include the table foot as the final row of my table. So I use T foot as the element. Okay. And then for the second table, I'm going to show you the situation of styling a table with collapsed cell borders. I'm going to explain the word collapsed later. And for this table, I have the caption, and also I include a column group. So you can see that my span of the first column is equal to 2, which means that I'm going to just include the first two columns as one entity. So the first column is simply having two columns as a group, and the other column is simply this one called country, and finally the next column is shown on the right hand side, which is represented by this col tag, okay. And after that, I include the table head, which has some column headers. So you can see these column headers. And after that, I include the table body, which include some table rows. And inside each table row, I include some table header and some table data. Same for the rest of the rows shown on the table. Okay. Now I'm going to style the first table first. You can see in my heading that I would like to style a table with separate cell borders. So what does it mean by that? We are going to illustrate this point. Okay, let us go to the first table, whose ID is called student table. So now I can simply set up the borders for this table first. Okay, you can see that my table has included a border which has a width of 5 pixels, and the style is groove, and the color of this border is light gray. And then I would like to set up the cell border style. If I set up the border collapse attribute to have a separate value, It means that each of the cells of your table has its own borders shown explicitly. So actually the separate value is the default one. So if I just want to keep my cells separate, I don't need to set this attribute value pair. I just ignore this attribute value pair. But for clarity, I would simply say that the border collapse attribute has a value called separate. Then I can set up the border spacing. Okay, the border spacing is a bit increased. And I can also set up the font size. Now the font size has increased to 20 pixels. And then I can go to the setup of the caption, which is originally shown at the top of the table. How can I style the caption? I can have some idea like this one. Now my font size of the caption has increased to 1.5 em. So it is the size which is 1.5 times the font before the change. Okay. I can also set up the font style to italic. I'm also able to set up the caption side to bottom, so it is now placed at the bottom of the table. Okay. After that, I would like to change the table header. So for these tags, I'm going to change the content enclosed by this ATH tag. Okay, now you can see that the borders are clearly shown by including the border. So the word separate in the border collapse attribute means that I'm able to see each of the cell borders. So the word separate means that they are separate from each other. Okay. Now you're able to see that the padding on the left-hand side of each table header has changed to 20 pixels, so you can see some space on the left-hand side of each table header. Okay. Then I'm going to change the appearance of a particular cell. For example, I want to change the appearance of this A grade ID cell. So how can I do this? You can expect that this content has changed a little bit after my styling. Okay, for this particular cell, I included a border. The border is having 4 pixels wide, and the pattern is dotted, and the color of the border is maroon. Okay, so by means of this idea, I'm able to set up each separate cell differently. This is also the property that you can do when you set up the border collapse attribute to separate. Now I'm going to change another cell content whose ID is called B grade, which is simply this cell. So what can I do? I can do something like this now. Okay, now you can see that this particular cell content has changed. I include a border, and I also increased the height of this cell to 40 pixels. And you can see that the text alignment is now changed to center. So as opposed to other cell contents, my letter B is placed in the center portion of my cell. And I'm also able to set up the vertical align attribute to top, which means that the letter B is placed a bit closer to the top border. Okay. Now I'm going to change the content to a different style for my table foot. So let me choose the table foot now. So you can see the table foot is simply the last row of my table. How can I change the style of it? Let me do it now. Now you can see that the table foot has changed its appearance to have a background color of light blue, and the text alignment of the cell contents has changed to right. So you can see that the 3 numbers are a bit closer to the right border of the background corresponding to the cell. Okay. If you want to change the appearance of the entire row of a table, we can have a way to do so. So let me go to the row corresponding to Sandy, which is here. Okay. So I just want to change the table row corresponding to this ID called Sandy-row. Okay, you can see that the entire row has changed its appearance. So for the height of the entire row, it has changed to 80 pixels. And for the background color, it has changed to khaki. So you can see the appearance of the entire row is different from the previous version. This is the result coming from the ID placed on the table row element. Okay. So this is the general idea of setting up the first table whose cell borders are set as separate due to the settings shown here. Okay, border collapse equals separate. So what about the situation when the table has collapsed cell borders? We can do it now. So let us go to the second table. Now we see that the ID for this table is called people-table. So for this table, I'm going to set up some simple stuff for the entire table. Okay, when I set the border collapse attribute to collapse, you can see that the size of the table is a bit shrunk. It means that the cells are no longer separate as opposed to the situation on the first table. You are going to see that the cell elements are touching one another. Now you can see that the font size has increased to 24 pixels and the border is having 5 pixels width. It is also a dashed border and the border has a red color. And then I'm going to show you the change of appearance in a certain column whose ID is called name age column, which is this one. Okay, so this one will be spanning 2 columns. So I'm going to change the appearance of the 2 columns as a whole. Now you can see that the 2 columns have a color called light green. Since the column span is equal to 2, it means that I can change the appearance of the 2 columns as a whole. Okay, so this is the meaning of the span value here. Okay. Then I'm going to change the appearance of a certain element in my table. So let me go to the element whose ID is called Australia. The text alignment is center, but now the alignment is not shown clearly because you can see that the cell is not that wide. Now you can see that when I change the font family to monospace, the cell size is a bit wider. If I want to change it to a smaller font size, I just set it up as 20 pixels in order to overwrite the table font size which is shown previously. Now the alignment is not yet clearly shown, but when I change the other components of my table later, you're able to see the text alignment is shown a bit clearly than now. Then I'm going to change the cell whose ID is called engineer, which is this one. Okay, so let me go to the CSS file to do the changes. Okay, you can see that the cell border is a bit different from the previous situation. The border is given by these values. The width is 5 pixels, and the style is dotted, and the border is in green color. After that, I would like to do the border for an entire row, which is indicated by this ID called m-row. I'm going to change this row, which is indicated by the middle row of the table. So how can I do that? I can simply do something for the entire table row. Okay, now you can see that the entire row is having a border of 5 pixels width, and the pattern is groove, and the orange is the color of the row border. And you can see that the row border is covered by the cell border. So we will investigate this situation later in this video. After that, I would like to simply add a column border for the country column. So let me go to this part first. Okay, and I'm going to indicate the column with this ID called country-column. So I'm going to simply add a border for the entire column. So let me go to the CSS file and let me find out the corresponding ID on the CSS file. In order to allow the changes on the column borders, I need the table borders to be collapsed first. That means for this table, I'm already able to do the changes on the column borders because the entire table is already set to the collapsed borders, which is shown at the very beginning. Yes, this one. Okay, so the entire table is already having the border collapse attribute to become collapsed. Okay, then let me set up the width for the entire column. Now you see that the entire column has a width of 200 pixels. And now you can see that the word Australia is in the middle of the cell. So this is the result coming from the part shown in the text align attribute. Okay, because it was set as center, I'm able to put the word in the center of the cell. Okay, so you can see the effect after I changed the width of the corresponding column. Okay, and also I'm also able to add the border right now. Now you can see that the border for the column is in blue, and the width of the border is 10 pixels, and the pattern is solid. We have to notice that the border width for the column is 10 pixels, which is wider than our previous borders for the cell called engineer and the row called m-row here. So you can also see this result coming from a wider border from the web page. Okay, so we have to notice that the border is wider than all other borders that I set up at the beginning. Now let us go to the situation with the borders being in conflict. So the conflict means something like this. When you see the engineer cell, you are able to see that the dotted pattern is able to cover the pattern for the row borders, okay? And also, you can see that the column border is able to cover both the cell border right here and the column border right here, and here, and here, and here. So this kind of rule is not a coincidence. It simply results from the rule called border conflict resolution. And we have to learn the conflict resolution now. In general, we have a number of rules shown here. When the border is set as hidden, the hidden border will win the conflict unconditionally. If the border is set as none, this border will have the lowest priority in terms of border conflict resolution. And then, when no hidden borders are set and at least one overlapping border is not none, then we will choose the wider border to be shown on the web page. Else, if the borders have the same width, we follow the precedence of the border style, which is shown here. Okay, the general idea is that we would simply put the more eye-catching border style to be shown on the web page. And else, if only the color is different, and we simply follow this precedence. So we show the cell border, followed by the row border, followed by the row group border, followed by the column border, followed by the column group, and followed by the table. Okay, so when we have all other conditions like the width and the border styles unchanged, when we only have the changes in color, we simply follow this rule to show the pattern. So when we go back to our example here, we note that the table border is 5 pixels, which is shown here. Okay, the border for the table is 5 pixels. And also we know that the cell border is also 5 pixels. Okay. So in this case, when the widths are the same, what will we do? According to the conflict resolution rule, I'm going to check the border style. So for the table border, it is dashed. And for the cell border, it is dotted. So that's why you will see that the dashed border will win the dotted border, and you can see the right hand side of the cell border is shown as dashed because the dashed border will win the rule shown here. Okay, and for the row border here, it will be the loser when it is compared to the cell border. Why? Because we see that the row border is groove. Okay, but the cell border is dotted, and dotted is going to win the groove. So that's why the dotted part will be shown instead of the groove part. Okay. And for the column border, I'm also able to see the result from this set of rules, because we know that the border width of the column is 10 pixels. Okay. It is wider than the table borders, the cell borders, and the row borders. And for this reason, the wider border will win the conflict. And we are able to see that the row border is able to cover all other borders. Okay, so that's the reason why we will have this kind of result on the web page. and this result would simply follow the rules coming from the border conflict resolution. Okay, so for this video, you are able to learn a lot of setup for the tables. The two important cases are the separate cell borders and the collapsed cell borders. Also, we are able to be aware of the border conflict resolution when it comes to handling the cell borders for the collapsed setup for the border collapse attribute. This is the end of the video. If you have any questions about my video, please leave your questions on the comment section below the video. If you like this video, please give me a like and please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.